on Tuesdays, political prisoners initiated the No to Executions Tuesdays campaign. They initiated this campaign in January 2024, and 1 year later, it has now expanded to 34 prisons across the country. Some of those executed in the past year and others currently on death row were and are members of this campaign. Among the participants in the hunger strike, 9 PMOI, People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, prisoners are currently on death row, with the sentences for 2 of them having been confirmed. On the 17th of January, Amnesty International called for immediately halt to the executions of Behruz Ehsani and Mehdi Hassani, who were notified last week that their death sentences have been upheld by the Supreme Court. They were convicted of enmity against God and corruption on earth and affiliation with the PMOI. They were subjected to torture and other ill treatment to force them to self-incriminate. In our conference, we are joined by a group of distinguished experts on the field of human rights. But before we go to our panelists, we watch a short clip elaborating on the campaign called No to Execution Tuesdays, Hunger Strikes in Iran's Prisons.
Over 45 years, the Iranian regime has executed more than 100,000 political dissidents. In 2024 alone, nearly 1,000 people have been executed, with many more awaiting their fate on death row. Every execution under this regime carries a political message: fear, control, and silence. In January 2024, political prisoners in Ghazal-Isar prison began a bold campaign: No to Executions Tuesdays. Through hunger strikes, they protested the systemic use of executions as tools of oppression. This movement has grown, spreading to 34 prisons across Iran. This campaign has gained widespread support inside Iran, with citizens risking their safety to protest executions. Globally, over 3,000 prominent leaders, Nobel laureates, and human rights advocates have united in support of this campaign, heeding Mrs. Mariam Rajavi's call to abolish executions. Each life lost to execution is a tragedy for humanity. Together, we can amplify the voices of those who cannot be silenced. Join us in supporting the No to Executions Tuesdays campaign. Speak out, take action, save lives.
Allow me now to introduce the first speaker of today's conference. Mrs. Herta Doblag-Gimlin is a German lawyer, academic and politician of the Social Democratic Party. She served as Federal Minister of Justice from 1998 to 2002 and was a member of the Bundestag from 1972 to 2009. She currently teaches as honorary professor of political science at the Free University of Berlin. Mrs. Gemlin, the floor is yours.
Much, Mrs. Moderator, and thank you for the friendly introduction. Dear friends and participants all over the world, Let me first give my thanks to the Iran Resistance Council for the invitation to participate to this important conference, underlining the demand stop the executions and saying no to death penalty. Today, we also express our deep admiration and support for the hunger strike campaign of the many courageous prisoners, political prisoners of the Mullah regime in Iran. And let me repeat that what our moderator has just mentioned, that we demand that Mr. Mehdi Hassani and Mr. Behrouz Eshani are set free immediately and are taken out of the death row. We all know that these two brave men, together with other political prisoners, have brought the No to Death Tuesday campaign into life, and at the moment they are on the verge of being executed. So again, we demand stop, no execution, no death penalty. Dear friends, these men are unbelievably courageous to resist to the mullah regime. And so at the beginning of this new year, we reaffirm their courage and resilience must finally to success. That means to the falling down of the mullahs and to a peaceful future in a democratic and constitutional Iran with human rights, if possible, in the year of 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, coming to the executions and to the horrible death penalty in Iran, uh, we know quite well that the number of depressing reports about the activities of the mullah regime is never ending. In fact, we know and we can see it's increasing. The mullah regime, let me express it in this way, is on the rampage. The persecution of the democratic opposition in Iran and out of Iran is increasing, and the arbitrariness of the blood judges with their executions is getting worse and worse. I could cite quite a lot of press articles and reports of the UN rapporteurs and special rapporteurs on the situation of human rights in Iran. Let me only recall the press release of the 23rd of December of last year, criticizing the persecution of Baha'i women in particular, or the newest one of the 14th of January this year on the death sentence of a Kurdish woman, or the press release with a more than justified criticism of the absurd and misogynistic hijab and chastity law. We all know that. But, dear friends, we all know that the level of unrest among the population in Iran is increasing as well. This can be seen from the numerous reports about the courageous activities all over Iran, and also about the murder of two of the worst blood judges in the last days. They were shot dead in their offices, despite being protected by their, let's say, tough security forces. This means something. And of course, we can see that the mullah regime is getting increasingly insecure. It is lashing out against opposition and against the Iranian people. And the head of the government, who was supposed to appeal to Western countries as a friendlier face of the mullah regime, he goes to Putin and forms a strategic alliance with him. Note, with Putin, whose authoritarian Russia, one of the veto members of the United Nations Security Council, tramples on the UN Charter and thus on human rights and a just world order. It's a strategic alliance with a criminal who is wanted by the International Criminal Court by warrant. And note again, the mullahs are tying this beautiful country of Iran and its peaceful people to Mr. Putin, who is increasing his blood guilt as a murderer every day with his war of aggression against Ukraine. daily violating international law, as I mentioned, and of course, human rights. And the mullahs are supplying Putin with more and more deadly drones and bombs day after day, thus drawing Iran ever more into this murderous war. We all know that the mullah regime is one of the main troubleshooters in the Middle East. And after Russia and Iran emerged weakened from the changes in Syria and the war in Israel Palestine, the mullah regime is increasingly drawing the people of Iran into the ever growing tension in this region through its nuclear ambitions. The consequences and the dangers for the people in the region in Iran, included a possible war, are more and more incalculable, especially, I have to say that, after the change of power in the USA. So, dear friends and listeners, it's good that Iran's Resistance Council, as the strongest organized democratic opposition in Iran, wants to put an end to the mullahs' nuclear policy, that it wants to end their policy as troublemakers in the region. It is good that they are standing up against the executions, that they say no to death penalty and to the oppression and they stand for democracy, for human rights, and the rule of law, and for finally creating a peaceful future with and for the people of Iran and the entire region. We are here to support this, the alternative to war and oppression. Thank you very much for attendance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gimlin, for your valuable intervention. Our next speaker is going to be Mrs. Elisabetta Zamparuti. She is a member of the Council of Europe's Committee for the Prevention of Torture, has been a steadfast supporter of the Iranian resistance for many years. Inspired by the launch of the No Executions Tuesday campaign in solidarity with Iranian political prisoners, she has shown her support by going on hunger strike every Tuesday to stand in solidarity with them. Unfortunately, Mrs. Zamparuti was not able to join us live, but we are now going to listen to her words.
I am so proud to be with you, with all of you today, in that very important day that marks 1 year of hunger strikes, not to execution Tuesday in Iran. As you know, I support this non-violent initiative since last year. And I joined the hunger strike each Tuesday because I strongly believe that only the non-violent method, only the non-violent approach could create a free Iran. I strongly believe that the non-violent method is the strongest one against the violence of each regime and also of the Iranian regime, because this is the most powerful and the only way to disarm the mullahs regime, which has only the inhuman means of suppressing opposition to survive. In that sense, I would like also to say that I think that the almost 1,000 executions recorded in Iran last year are not just a punishment. 1,000 executions are a pillar of the regime strategy to survive. In that sense, I support, and also today I join the No to Execution Tuesday hunger strike, being aware that we have to increase the support to this initiative, because we have to increase the support to the brave women and men doing the same hunger strike and doing the same initiative from the death row in Iran. And the death row in Iran, I think, is the most dark place in the world. However, through the awareness, it's possible to transform that dark place in a very bright and lighting place, because it's the place of awareness of human rights and awareness of democracy. We know how many people are executed. We know how many people are sentenced to death in Iran. Each day there is a case to organize campaigns, and recently, for example, the case of a woman, Pakshan Azizi. But I know also those members of the organization of the Iranian resistance. I know that Beirut Ezani and Mehdi Hassani have been recently sentenced to death, and they, just because they are members of the PMO and members of the Iranian resistance, the same Iranian resistance, the same political opposition that was persecuted in 1988 during the massacre of almost 30,000 people in a very short time. The nature of the regime is the same. The nature of the fight is the same today. And it's important to decide on which side we want to be. And for sure, I want to be on the side of freedom, on the side of the respect of human rights, on the side of the rule of law. This means to be with you, to be on your side, to be together with all the inmates in the death row today doing their hunger strike in such a harsh condition, inhuman condition. And to be with them, I know, is to be with our values of democracy, of freedom, and of peace also. So thank you very much for all what you do, and we have to continue to be together, and we have to increase the support and to increase the knowledge of what is this terrific regime, which is the Iranian regime. Thank you, my friends, and I wish all the best for you, but I may say also for us, because I wish a free Iran.
Allow me to deeply thank Mrs. Zamparoti for her unwavering support for the campaign and for the fight for human rights in Iran. Our next speaker is going to be Mr. Taher Boumedra, president of the GVMI, the Justice for the Victims of 1988 Massacre in Iran. In this capacity, since 2016, he has led the GVMI's work to achieve accountability and justice for the victims of the 1988 massacre in Iran. He was chief of the Human Rights Office of United Nations Assistance Mission for Iraq and advisor to the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Camp Ashraf affairs from 2009 until 2012. Mr. Boumedra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Samira. Hello, Ingrid. Hello, Gemelin. It's nice to be with you in this very sensitive subject matter. Now to Death Tuesdays. In fact, the international community has observed a spike in executions of political prisoners in Iran. Very recently, the BBC has reported the execution of at least 900 political prisoners. And the United Nations has also declared that at least 40 people were executed in this in the last month in January 2024. That means that executions are going and as hard as ever, and the death penalty in Iran is not a simple provision of the penal code. In fact, it's an instrument, a political instrument, to subject the opposition and dissenting opinions, to quieten them and to frighten them from getting involved in any protests. The reality is that most of the political executions we observed lately were due to the demonstrations that took place in 2017, 2019, and lately in 2022. So people went out on strike, some just for the fact to go out and express some opinions, some discontent, and for that they were prosecuted and death penalty was pronounced on them, and they are on death row. So the actual No to Death Tuesdays is an action or a campaign of those people in the death row, particularly in even prison and in Qajar, Kezel Sahar in Qajar. Those prisons are notorious and very well known for the abusive use of the death penalty. And why Iran is killing so much of its prisoners? Why Iran is so notorious in using the death penalty? In fact, Iran is the only country that opposed the call of the United Nations to observe a moratorium on death penalty. Others opposed the resolutions of the United Nations. But Iran not only opposed, it went in sending a letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations declaring its position that death penalty will not be dropped and it will be applied for as long as the Sharia law is applicable. So I would like to briefly speak about the attitude and the challenge of the Iranian regime to international law in general and the death penalty in particular. The issue of death penalty, it was declared since 1966 under Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that death penalty should be dropped, and that death penalty is only allowed in very special circumstances. And those circumstances are exception for as long as the country maintains the death penalty. So death penalty as an exception is not to be implemented on children. That is a commitment and an obligation in international law. Death penalty is not to be implemented against pregnant women. That is, again, a very serious obligation under international law. Death penalty is not to be implemented on elderly people. And again, all these situations are abusively used in Iran against women, against children, against elderly. And Article 6, paragraph 2 of the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, makes it, or rather imposes, an obligation not to consider or not to implement the death penalty for political reasons. So a political dissident could be tried for whatever his offense. He cannot be subjected to death penalty. Yet the Iranian regime uses, in fact, death penalty as a political tool. And this is unacceptable. Also, the death penalty in the situation of those countries that still maintain it is subject to very strict restrictions. Death penalty, or people prosecuted for offenses amounting to death penalty, are subject to a strict criteria that is under this article of the ICCPR. So no death penalty is implemented without the defense having a lawyer to defend him or her. And no death penalty is implementable in a proceedings in the absence of a lawyer of the choice of the accused person. So there are plenty of restrictions on the use of death penalty for those countries who still keep it in their legislation. But we're not talking about a normal country that uses death penalty as a deterrent for ordinary crimes. Death penalty in Iran is used as a deterrent to political decency. So it uses it since 1979. And we all know that people in 1988 were massively executed in some proceedings that take 3 or 4 minutes. And again, this is a serious violation of the ICCPR because the proceedings in situations involving death penalty, it must be strictly according to the due process of law. And when we say due process, it doesn't mean the due process of the Iranian law. It's the due process of international law. Why is it due process of international law? Because the ICCPR has been signed and ratified by the Iranian state. So ICCPR is binding on Iran, binding on the current regime in Iran, and therefore they have to respect all the safeguards of this convention when prosecuting people for offenses that might end to a death penalty. So, but we know that it's not a question of legality. We are dealing with a country that does not recognize international law as it stands today. And therefore, the legal arguments within the regime arrangements, it's not worth really following it. But what is important is that civil society, families of the victims of these executions should be aware that there are deterrents at the level of international law, deterrents to the Iranian regime. In fact, these deterrents, we could search or we could identify them, how to deter this regime from abusively using death penalty. And let me say that the abusive use of death penalty, like in 1988 massacre, it could amount to a crime against humanity. And as long as the Iranian regime is insisting on implementing, and it's appearing that Iran is one of the most well-known implementing death penalty. So the only deterrent to this is to use the provisions of international law against this regime. Who could use these provisions? It's the courts, international courts. It's the national courts under the principle of universal jurisdiction. As long as this crime or the crime of using massively death penalty without due respect to the safeguards of a fair trial. The people in Iran actually on hunger strike are declaring, are informing the international community that their prosecution was a result of unfair trial. Unfair trials is a violation of the binding international convention, the ICCPR, and therefore the massive use of this of death penalty, it could only be deterred by taking the judges and the judicial officers in Iran to make sure that they are held accountable before international courts or before national courts that implement universal jurisdiction. So my call on behalf of JVMI is that we, the civil society, mobilize to make sure that all the judges, all the judicial officers in Iran who implement massively and abusively and illegally death penalty must be held accountable and must be reported to first the United Nations special mandates and the United Nations relevant special rapporteurs, but also we need to bring this matter to the public prosecutor of the ICC, and also make sure that whether in Germany, whether in England, whether in France, wherever the officers and the judges implementing abusively and massively death penalty must be held accountable when they travel and go to Europe or wherever universal jurisdiction is implemented. I say that, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Boumetra, for your very precise intervention and for your appeal. We are now going to listen to excerpts from political prisoner Said Masri's message from Fazl Hisar prison. Said Masri is a supporter of the Mujahideen organization, and he has been in prison for 25 years. He is one of the prisoners who started the campaign of No to Execution Tuesdays.
In a poignant and urgent cry for justice, Iranian political prisoner Saeed Masuri, now in his 25th year of incarceration, pens a letter that speaks directly to the conscience of the world. Addressed to international human rights authorities, including the UN Human Rights Council and other global leaders, this heartfelt appeal calls for immediate and decisive action to halt the atrocities. Here are excerpts from his letter. This is the 25th Christmas I am spending in prison. I do not know what more my eyes must see or what further burdens and heartaches this heart must endure. From the time I was sentenced to death and held in solitary confinement, considering every meeting to be my last, and every opening and closing sound of the door as a death knell, even after 25 years, every such sound still triggers the same feeling. To witnessing the executions of dear friends and comrades up close, I no longer know how much more I must see and endure. I have witnessed the absence and loss of countless cellmates. Hojat Zamani, Majid Kavusi, Farzad Kamangar, Ali Sarami, Abdulreza Rajabi, Afshin Osanlu, Mansour Radpour, and so many others. I still hear the screams of their families, the weight of their grief pressing on my soul. Even now, the memory of Mohana, a 6-year-old girl drawing herself, and her mother next to her father's gallows, haunts me. How, after witnessing her kiss her father's lifeless face, my heart continues to beat, I cannot understand. Today we face the grim reality of an execution every 4 hours. During this Christmas season alone, nearly 25 innocent people were executed, reducing the interval to every 2.5 hours. This letter is not for my compatriots, who are already doing all they can, but to all awakened consciences in international human rights institutions. To the UN Secretary-General, the European Commission President, and every influential figure. Do not let these executions remain mere statistics. Each number represents a life lost, a family shattered. It is imperative to bind this regime to humane standards by conditioning diplomatic and political interactions on halting these executions. Every moment of inaction enables more bloodshed. Let us refer Iran's egregious human rights violations to the UN Security Council and put an end to this killing machine. To act now is to save lives. To delay is to let more innocent blood be spilled. Saeed Masuri's letter is a plea from the depths of unimaginable suffering. A plea for the world to rise to its moral duty. The cost of inaction is measured in lives lost and futures destroyed. The time to act is now.
We are now going to listen to Mrs. Ingrid Betancourt's words. Ingrid Betancourt is a French-Colombian politician, activist, and former senator and presidential candidate in Colombia, renowned for her resilience and advocacy for peace and democracy. She has been an international advocate for human rights, inspiring efforts for peace and justice worldwide. Mrs. Betancourt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Samira. I would like to extend a deep hello to Tahar and Jamali. It's so nice to be sharing this floor with you. And I have been listening to all you have been saying, and of course it triggers many thoughts. But I have to admit that listening to Said Masuri just now is a heartbreaking moment where everything comes into place. And perhaps I should say that the cry of Said has to resonate in our own hearts in order for us to think clearly. We are in a moment, I should say, in a historical moment in the world where we see that everything is changing. That's something that I think we all agree here. Things that we didn't think were possible a month ago are happening. And I say this because as much as changes can be sometimes threatening and calling for some fear, I really do believe that changes can also bring hope, and we need changes, particularly in the situation of Iran. The campaign that we are supporting today is one that has to put us to think in what it indicates, because I think that we have been in the world looking at Iran like a normal country. We have been trying to understand Iran as we understand our own countries, with rules, with separation of powers, with control, with the possibility for people to understand what is true and what is false, with accountability. And this is something that doesn't exist in Iran. And what we are seeing with the testimony of Said, 25 years in jail, every day thinking that it has to be, that it could be his last one, seeing his friends being killed in sham trials. And what he says in his letter, telling us that he's not writing for his people because his people are doing everything they can. He's writing for us outside. What are we doing? And I think that one of the conclusions, at least for me, is that we have to stop the hypocrisy in the world towards Iran. We have to stop treating Iran like a normal country. We have to stop thinking that that Iran has a place amongst the other nations, in the Council of Nations, in the UN, that we should allow Iran to take decisions on human rights, on economics, on war and peace, when it's an agent that is totally against everything that the UN and the Council of Nations stands for. We all know that Iran is a problem. Of course, one of the things that the evidences that that it's a failed regime, that it's a failed country in the hands of the Ayatollahs, is the protest we have been seeing. Tahar was reminding us that from 2017, 2019, 2022, we have been seeing non-stopping protests all over the country. No one can say that the Iranian people are cowards or that the Iranian people are silent. What happened in Iran when there was this evidence of how they treated a woman, Masa Amini? The whole country was in motion to protest, and we left them alone. We left them alone because we don't want to see what is the reality of this country. It's not a democracy. It's a dictatorship of the worst kind. It's a dictatorship that is based on drug trafficking, on exporting terrorism, on corruption. It has depleted the reserves of its own country. It has looted the richness of the people of Iran. And I think that as long as we continue playing the game, that we can impose on them sanctions, or that we can deter them to do something that could be right in the vision of what is right in international law, we are fooling ourselves, and we are betraying the Iranian people that are doing the work in Iran. They are protesting, they are putting their lives at risk, they are being killed, and they know they are being killed, that they will be prosecuted, that there will be sham trials against them, and that they will be hanged. And this is on and on and on. You were pointing out that there is a peak in the execution rates in Iran last year. What does that indicate us? It indicates us not that the execution is a political instrument against its own people. That we know. I think it indicates us something more strategic, is that it's the only instrument the regime has in order to control its people. Fear, abuse of power, crime, corruption, they are left with nothing. If a regime, in order to be able to rule its country and its people, has to kill them, has to put them in jail in massive numbers, it's because it's a failed regime. And that's what I think we have to think about, is how we are going to support the Iranian people in order to free themselves from this unlegitimate regime. We cannot continue thinking that our countries can have diplomatic relations with Iran just because it's Iran. We have to understand that Iran is paying terrorists to come and commit crimes in our countries, that Iran is executing and strengthening its power through criminal acts against its own people. We have to stop that regime from existing. We cannot continue thinking that we can force them or deter them or negotiate with them. I think this is a moment where the world has to come to face the truth. We are in front of an evil regime that has to be stopped. And I think that the overthrow of the regime is in the agenda of 2025. I think that that's what we should discuss today. What are the instruments we have to make the overthrow of the regime happen in this year? And I think that for the first time, there are many indicators that this is possible. First, of course, because the country is in a total economic collapse. Second, because we can see that the political regime is divided inside its own forces. You were pointing some minutes ago how 2 judges were killed in spite of the bodyguard that they could have, and how, remember, Ibrahim Raisi was killed also, murdered, or in an accident. The fact is that Khamenei is facing a moment where he has to face a reality, is that his succession is not going to be easy. It's his authority has been shaken, and this is a moment of weakness for the regime, of political weakness. And then there is what has been happening in the region. Of course, the fall of Bashar al-Assad is something that is crucial for understanding the weakness of Iran right now, because we know that through Bashar al-Assad and through the Hezbollah in Lebanon, which also has been defeated in so many ways in Lebanon, this construction of military allies to gain access to the Mediterranean has collapsed for Iran. And its credibility has collapsed as a power, a regional power. And also its credibility as a powerful agent that has to be taken into account to define peace in the region. I think it's gone. If we cannot say now, for example, that in order to find a peace solution in the Middle East between, for example, Israel and the Palestinians, Iran has to say a word. I think that's gone. Because none of the countries of the region, the big countries of the region, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, are welcoming the imposition of some type of say on these matters by Iran. I think that when I say that things have deeply changed is because a year ago, when Iran would speak, we would have reacted in a different manner. I think that today, when the regime speaks, we are now very conscious that they're not powerful, that they are not respected, that they are not, that they don't have good allies that can back them up. Because we were talking about Putin. What can Putin do today to support Iran? Nothing. Nothing. Iran is bringing drones to Putin. Iran is also constructing drones in Venezuela. That's all the might of want to be nuclear power in the region. I think this is the moment where the regime has to be overthrown. And I think that everything is coming into place, because now we can see the reality of a regime that try to present itself as a kind of democracy, a religious democracy, but a democracy. No, it's not a religious nothing, because of course everything they do is against the sheer thought of anything that would be moral, so less to speak about religion. And they're not a democracy. And they're not even a regime that could be acceptable to deal with. So I think we are facing the end of this regime. And we need also to evaluate the capacity of the resistance to take over and to do the transition. Because I think this is a very big asset Iran has. This campaign, for example, and so many others. Why today, in the whole world, wherever I go, in Europe or in South America or in North America, now people of jaywalkers, people in the streets, understand that Iran is a terrorist country, that it's a dictatorship, that it's a problem for the world. It wasn't the case two years ago. People would say, no, but it's important because it's done. People don't believe in Iran, the regime of Iran, anymore. And I think this is the big victory of the National Council of the Resistance of Iran. I think that the resistance has been amazing in showing the true face of the regime. And the public opinion, not only the public opinion in Iran, which we know is ready to overthrow the regime, but the public opinion of the world, of people that you talk with. Now people understand what is the essence, the evil essence of the Iranian regime. So if we need to make a call today, which is, I think our purpose is to think of how to act, we need to call to stop the hypocrites that in the world are trying to make us believe that the Iranian is a regime that is serious and that has to be listened to and has to be taken into account. I think it's done. We know that they are criminals. All their allies are criminals. The way they have been constructing their dictatorship is through very corrupt and bloodthirsty allies in the world like them. And we need to bring them all down. And if we begin by Iran, all the others will collapse. So we need to begin the work. And the work is to save our principles, our democracy, our freedom. It's, I think, the big task of all of us in this 2025, year 2025, beautiful year. It has to be the fight for freedom all over the world, beginning with Iran. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Betancourt, for your very important analysis. I would like to let you know that 5,500 spectators were and are following us live today. As we have heard from each of you, distinguished speakers, The Iranian people continue to resist inside and outside prisons, despite the increase in executions, despite repression. And while the regime is weaker than ever and has suffered incommensurable defeats and has increased repression to unprecedented the levels, on the other hand, the Iranian people and the resistance are stronger every day. So yes, it is time to end hypocrisy, and it is time for the regime to go. I would now like to thank you all. I would first of all like to thank Iran Human Rights Monitor, the organizer, and each of you distinguished experts who took part in today's event, and all the audience members. Today's conference has come to an end. Thank you for your attention.